You have, obviously, Mama Day's Housemaid of Dawn. You've got Vine Gloria's Custer Died for Your Sins. And you have Alfonso Ortiz's The Tale of the World, which, these three works just really sort of revolutionized academia in a way that, I should say, by bringing Native people as the scholars as opposed to simply the subject.
Perfect. We'll be done by 11.
Sweet.
Maybe. Maybe we will. So we want to do radio voices? Is that how we want to start it off? Scott Hale?
I'm following your lead.
We've got Scott Hale here. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to be back.
We're laughing because before we started this, Scott was, and before he started drinking that Diet Coke, he was, that's right. We were talking about how he did some radio stuff, but we'll get into that. So Scott is an interesting guy. We were just discussing, is Scott the young guy of the old dealers or the oldest guy of the new dealers? Now, what that means is that there is kind of this dichotomy. Most of the dealers are kind of 50 and over, really probably even 60 and over. But there's a younger group of dealers that are kind of coming in too. Now, Scott's not a dealer, he's an appraiser. And I probably wouldn't want to be lumped in with us dealers.
Oh, just the opposite.
Really?
Some of the most knowledgeable, experienced, qualified individuals I know. And
but you're not a dealer. You've never dealt really?
I do some private advising, but no storefront, no website, no.
Not for that, but for your appraisal site. Just get it out right there. Go ahead and give it to us now.
We have a couple of different ones. I have, of course, Native American Art Appraisals Incorporated, NAAAINC.com. We also have SouthwestArtAppraisals.com and fresh to the market, Southwest Wine Appraisals.
Oh, he does wine. So you got Native American wine. What else?
Fine art. Obviously, Western, Latin American, primarily Spanish colonial.
Yeah. So, okay, now we got that out of the way. So that's the real reason these guys want to come here.
Always.
No, he doesn't. I want to know, you've got this really interesting family history, and that part I know something about. And I've known you for a long time, but I want to kind of delve into I guess it would start with your grandfather, right?
Starts with the grandfather. Basically, not too long after 1931, when all the 31ers came to help build Boulder Dam. He had worked on some dam projects prior to that, but arrives in what then is Boulder City, and or it's not even an actual city. It wasn't a municipality in the United States until the late 60s, I believe. Prior to that, it had always been an actual federal reservation, government contract city. But the interesting thing is that at this time, Boulder City was something like 2-3 times the size of Las Vegas. At that point, Las Vegas was basically a train stop on the way to carry troops, to
And when did the
dam
dam start? Did it start around 30?
Started around 30, 31.
Yeah.
They call the first batch of guys that come out the 31ers.
Yeah, so when he's coming, is he wanting to work on the dam?
Exactly.
Is that originally what it is?
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're in the Great Depression.
Basically, we're in the Great Depression, and this is a way where an able-bodied can make some money.
And where did he come from?
He had been in Missouri, and his family had been there. They were, very, very poor migrant workers, and ended up having a small farm in Missouri and never made a whole lot of money. So when the opportunity came, sort of Horatio Alger's go west young man type of situation.
So was it just him or was it the whole family?
It wasn't until he got hurt that my soon-to-be grandmother, I guess, many generations, but you get the point, he fell far and fell hard. In fact, there was a...
What was he? He had he was a scaffolder?
He was one of the high scalers.
Yeah.
And when he actually fell, it wasn't on rope. He was up on top of some scaffolding that they didn't realize he was up there, and somebody started to turn a wrench and deconstruct this thing, and it all came tumbling down. Fortunately, that scaffolding and where he fell and how he fell sort of provided somewhat of I don't know the word for it, maybe
a little
cocoon.
cage.
Yeah, a cage that basically prevented him from being crushed by an awful lot of much heavier equipment, rock, etc. debris. So he couldn't work for 6 companies any longer. And that's when my grandmother came out to help him convalesce. They ended up getting married, and
So she wasn't part of the family at that point. She
Not
was
yet.
she was a girlfriend, or
she was a girlfriend, paramour. I know they had corresponded via
yeah. So he
via
has
letters.
this girlfriend back in Missouri. He gets hurt. She comes out to help him because they really didn't have any med kind of things, right? You got hurt, you're just kind of off the job, I think, right?
Exactly. And I don't know, Mom would know better than I would if there had been any sort of like family relationship. The families knew each other or something like that. But she came out west to help him get better, and because she had taken a job with 6 companies as well, and there was some sort of policy about not being able to have 2 members in the same family both work for 6 companies.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up acquiring from a woman by the name of Virginia McCormick it had really kind of been sort of the salon of Boulder City, and they'd have reading groups and stuff like that, but it had been a satellite of Richardson's Trading Post, the famous one
in Gallup. Yeah.
And so in 1936, he ended up buying this, and over the next 30 plus years, they were dealers, primarily with Dene peoples. They had silversmiths and weavers in the shop, and my mom was raised with, what today would be an au pair, basically.
So it's a trading post, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to use that term, even though they incorporated that into the title.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was the title of the...
It originally was Navajope Indian Store, as opposed to Trading Post.
Yeah.
They changed the name in 1947, but obviously it was never a government-sanctioned, recognized trading post.
Yeah, because it wasn't
per
on
se.
any reservation, for one thing.
Exactly, and it was what really became sort of a cottage industry along Route 66 and in the Southwest.
And that was
During that
McCormick's, the store before he took it. What was the name of that?
It was Navajope Indian Store.
Before he got it, though, because he gets it in 36.
My grandfather gets it in 36.
What was it then, though? Because he bought
Navajope
it, right?
Indian Store.
Okay.
He did not come up with the name.
Okay, I
But
was just curious.
At least insofar as I know.
Because there was another trading post or another post around there that did that, too.
There was, and it's funny, if you go to Boulder City today, there's several different...
Yeah, do you remember the name of the one? It was a woman that ran it that was close. Dixon used to sell his paintings there.
That's Virginia McCormick.
That was who it was.
That's the same one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay,
Yep.
yeah, because he sold his paintings through that.
Grandfather knew Dixon, knew Jimmy Swinnerton. We know he knew Ansel. Pretty sure he met Edward Weston. But, for a government construction site, it's absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
Its place in sort of
All the
American
people
modernist
coming out
art
there. Yeah.
history.
Well, Dixon came out there in April
Exactly.
34, and
Exactly.
painted for the PWPA for a whole month.
And wrote that it's the place where you could hear God laugh at you.
Yeah. He also wrote
Love
that
that
he
quote.
saw 5 men die while he was there. And he stayed in the labor camp.
It's funny because you think about OSHA and stuff like that today, and how a project like that, I don't know if it could be done.
Yeah.
You're mining in canyons, you're drilling out, there's all that
Oh, yeah. No,
dust.
it'd
and
be
it's
very
just
different. So he
unbelievable.
starts running that from 1936. He gets married.
Gets married, and
Has your mom.
has my mom, has her sister, my aunt, and from 36 until their deaths in 69, they ran and operated Navajope Trading Post.
with silversmiths on.
Silversmiths on site, sold an awful lot of curio jewelry, and
Do they have a
basically-
trademark? Did they have their own kind of guild mark that they use for a shop mark?
not that I've been able to locate.
Yeah.
We still have some tools and some stamps. We know several of the Smiths. Someone like Harrison Yazzie worked there. Someone like Tom Daisy worked there.
And would they live on site or would they come,
In the back.
They did.
There was a on-site place in the back, and then the women would wake up early in the morning, go and help take care of my mom and my aunt, and the men start working in the shop.
Start making jewelry, basically, right?
Jewelry. And it's amazing some of the tourist traffic that obviously comes through there, whether it was Look magazine or Life magazine. I mean, once it was finally constructed, I think in like 35, 36,
Yeah.
came in under time, under budget. When does that happen anymore?
Not very often.
For something like
Yeah.
that. As a result, there's incredible tourism that's coming in. They're coming off of Route 66 up to see the dam. And over the years, he not only became pretty involved in the turquoise industry, but we have articles showing that, I don't want to say it was a who's who, but there were some pretty notable figures that ended up coming through, whether it was, to see the dam and just
Like
stop
Teddy,
at the store.
Like what kind of people would be coming through? Presidents and that kind of thing?
I don't know of any presidents. I know that supposedly the Shah of, at that time, Persia, had actually come through, and there were several Hollywood figures,
Yeah,
including
sure.
some of the producers, because they would come and source material for the movie sets and end up buying a great deal of turquoise as a result.
And so your mom grows up working at the trading post?
Mom
living
grows
there?
up working in the store, and she remembers, I don't know that she ever cut any stones or anything like that or polished the stones, but she remembers polishing an awful lot of jewelry over the years, helping people try on, some commercial moccasins and stuff like that. And that was her job until she ended up leaving to go to college.
Right. And your mom, Cynthia, is an appraiser just like yourself.
Yep.
And that's so, a lot of times I do these interviews and we get the mom and dad say, please don't go into this business. But I'm guessing that's kind of opposite in this case.
It's funny, it wasn't so much please don't go in this business, and I think I can speak for her in this regard as well. It was, I will never go into this business. She ended up, as a result, going into museum work and worked at some really notable collections like the Denver Art Museum and, of course, Gilcrease in Tulsa, as well as some tribal museums in Oklahoma.
And was that as an appraiser or was that as a curator?
That was as museum professional.
Yeah.
She was curator at Creek Council House. She was collections manager at 5 Civilized Tribes. She was on the anthropology staff at Gilcrease. And interestingly enough, she used her retail background early in her career when she was the manager of the gift shop at the Denver Art Museum. And she downplays it, but I remind people all the time that particularly in that city at that time, there was some you could buy Margaret Tafoya's at the Denver Art Museum.
I'm sure.
Kohlberg's was, of course, the great old venerable gallery there in the 70s. And there are some collections today, which I think you could argue, really kind of began via the gift shop at the Denver Art Museum.
Selling by your mom.
Props to the dam. She also, of course, worked with, I think it was after Norm Fetter, but she worked very closely with Dick Kahn when he was curator there as well. So,
but she didn't really want you to go in this business, is what you're telling me?
it's not so much that she didn't want. It was, I can remember being a kid and, you're 7. You think 7-year-old thoughts.
Right.
And it was like, the reason I can't have a new bike is because mom and dad bought a new pot.
Yeah.
A new rug, or a new bracelet. And
Right.
in Denver at that time,
And that's where you were growing up?
that's where I was growing up.
Yeah.
And there was a trading, just people get together in their houses on Saturday nights. And it was, traders parties. And some notable figures, Mark Winter, I know, knew my folks back then and was trading. Chris Webster here in town would come up. So that, these people would get together in their living rooms and buy and sell.
Right.
And again, awful lot of collections built that way. I can remember getting my very first piece of Indian art, so to speak, when I was probably about 3 years old. And I still have the little teeny Navajo cab, stone rope bezel. Shank's long gone, but, it's still on the plate. And so, I've been collecting, you could argue, since I was basically 3 years old.
Yeah. And was there a point that you go, I really do like this material and I want to start collecting it?
It was much later.
Yeah.
Like I said, I can
Yeah,
remember
it
being
makes
somewhat
sense.
resentful
Yeah.
of it, but it ended up, I'm off in college. And
But you grew up in Denver. Let's just
Grew up in Denver, but
Yeah.
my dad worked for Arm& Hammer and Occidental. And so we kind of bounced around a little
To
bit.
different towns and
Different towns. Started off in Colorado, went to Bakersfield, California, because of Oxy's presence in the current oil field. Then over to Grand Junction, which in a lot of ways I still consider home. Western Colorado is, you know, God's country.
Yeah.
Then back to Bakersfield, because with Bakersfield, once is never enough.
Yeah, of course.
You've got to do it
I
at
think
least
you gotta
twice,
do it.
right?
And did you graduate from Bakersfield?
No, I actually graduated
Too
from
bad.
Jenks High School in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, yeah, that's there. Okay, there's the Oklahoma connection.
We end up going to Tulsa in 1987, and Mom ends up, of course, working with Gilcrease, but we are literally boots on the ground there for not even 36 hours before I'm in Gilcrease with Mom and Dad and my brother. And, you know, I've got a funny story about the restaurant there in Buffalo Burgers, but I was 16 when I saw Blumenstein Superstition for the very first time. And
So for those who don't know, this is a very famous painting by E.L. Blumenstein. That's
one of the Taos founders. It's, you know, an incredible blend of American realism, American modernism, regionalism.
so that stuck with you in 16 when you saw it.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think it was about that painting? Do you know?
Everything. I mean, the look on his face is, I won't say haunting, but it's, you know, striking to say the least. And to have, again, such, you know, sort of realism then just blossom into this abstraction and you know, you consider everything that's going on in that painting, and it literally is sort of an encapsulation of American art history, at least up until the 1920s.
And so when you go to Tulsa, do you always make an homage to Gilcrease? Go see
As
that painting?
often as I can.
Yeah.
I obviously work very closely with the museum today in
Yeah.
a number of regards, and that and Hoover's Hunger are
that's a very strong painting. I must
Walter
admit.
Hoover's Hunger.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Great. Another Taos painting.
Well, also they have all this Willard Stone
They've got all the
sculpture,
Willard Stone.
which is my favorite.
You know, I can't play favorites by any stretch, but for your viewers and listeners that have never been to, you know, Oklahoma in general, but specifically the Gilcrease in Tulsa, there's some incredible museums there, and there are.
You got the Philbrook as well.
You've got the Philbrook. You've got, of course, National Cowboy and Western Heritage.
in Oklahoma City.
And I got to give props to my alma mater and former employer at the University of Oklahoma,
Right.
with the Fred Jones.
Yeah, that's an amazing.
Junior
Yeah, and we're going to get to that. So you leave. You graduate high school.
Graduate high
You have
school.
any idea what you're thinking you're going to go into at this point?
I am going back to Colorado. I'm going to CU. It's just a done deal.
Yeah.
And there was a goof with the Jenks High School never sent my transcript. They wouldn't let the students send it themselves. They insisted on sending your transcript because otherwise you're going to, you know,
Right.
jack with it or something.
You're going to lose it.
And anyway, they never sent the transcript. So my dad ended up, you know, he was an alumni for both undergrad and law, and he called some friends, and we were able to get the mistake corrected. But in the meantime, I was going to see you. I didn't have any questions. My parents, of course, are on my back. Apply elsewhere. You've got to have more than one.
Right.
So I ended up just filling out the, you know, my name is and all the basics for an application for Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. And I literally remember getting pulled out of class. This is after we've already gotten the situation corrected at CU. And some counselor I'd never met before makes me write an essay because we're going to complete your application for Trinity. We're going to get this sent off. We're going to get you.
Way to go, Jinx.
Exactly. And sure enough, ended up getting accepted, went down for a visit with my dad, and, you know, what can you say?
You fell in
San
love with
Antonio
it,
is
yeah.
one of the great American cities.
All right.
Trinity was recently ranked the best school in Texas for the first time ever over Rice University. So
it's good school.
wonderful school, wonderful experience.
Not a lot of skiing though.
Not as much skiing.
Yeah.
That was the one.
Yeah. And so what was your major in? What were you interested in doing? Did you have an idea?
Started off an econ major.
Yeah.
My dad's like, you got to go into business. Got to go into business.
What did your dad do?
He was an attorney. Mm-hmm. And he ended up really one of the sort of first generation, as it were, in terms of environmental lawyers in the United States, and kind of helped pioneer that program at the University of Colorado.
And was he cool
Law
with
School.
all this Native American art that your mom was dealing with and all the time? Did he have that same kind of interest and love at all?
Here's the thing. He grew up in Colorado, and like most Americans during that time, had the rite of passage and the great Southwestern Odyssey, whether by train or car. And so he grew up sort of liking this stuff, but not a collector. And it wasn't until he met my mom, and she basically said, look, if you're going to marry me, there's two things you got to start collecting. And of course, native art and Western art was the first. The second was Arabian horses, and that's a whole other story entirely.
Wow.
But yeah, we were active in the Arabian horse industry for a number of years. But
That never pulled you into doing that either?
I got pulled into that,
No,
and I
but-
got thrown out of doing that through the air,
Okay.
several yards into a great big exposed pit of lava rock, where I 3-point landing.
Oh yeah.
This for the concussion.
He's showing
Compound fracture on the femur.
he's showing a big
from the knee.
area in his head that has
Yeah,
a dent
a
in
big-
it. Yeah.
Big lump. Big lump. Didn't even knock any sense into me. That's the worst part.
So that was a possibility to go into raising horses and that kind of thing?
Not horses. A horse.
Okay. What does that mean? I don't know.
Meaning today I would still love a horse.
Oh, I see.
Horses, as everyone who's in that industry knows, it's a full-time job.
Right.
And it's, nobody went into the Arabian horse industry to get rich.
Yeah, okay.
Put it that way.
And,
But,
and so somehow you avoid that pitfall.
I avoid that pitfall.
You're in economics and
I'm in economics, but I decide at some point that I like reading novels more than textbooks, and I like writing papers more than taking tests. And so I ended up switching to English. And the only reason my dad didn't absolutely have a heart attack was because he said, well, you'll always be able to write, which of course was prophetic all these many years later.
Yeah.
But I ended up in college discovering the work of Scott Hale, another great Oklahoman, right? And again, one of those sort of life is not going to be the same. So
through his literature?
Through his literature, and of course then learning the works of people like Leslie Marmon Silko and James Welch, and of course I have to give props out to another great Oklahoman and the new poet laureate for the United States, the Muskogee author Joy Harjo, and musician.
So you like reading, you like writing.
I like reading.
And so you
I like
see yourself as a
writing.
novelist going out of those shoots?
Not necessarily. I mean, I certainly
Or
dabbled in
journalist,
creative writing. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But, I ended up really getting into theory, quite honestly, and some of the post-structuralists, and reading Foucault and reading Derrida and Lacan and all these guys, and how that applies to literature. And it made, weirdly enough, a certain amount of sense to me.
And how do you
So
turn
that-
that into a living is the
that-
question.
Turned into going to grad school.
Of course it
at the
does.
University of Oklahoma. I had applied to the University of Arizona and was rejected, which I'm still a little bitter about. Got into
I'll talk to them
UNM, but
about
they didn't give me any money, and did get into OU where they came through with a stipend, and so boomer sooner, I'm back in Oklahoma.
And what was it? What were you getting your was it some master's?
It was master's in English, but I focused in native lit. And so then after going on to work on my doctorate, that sort of morphed. And my dissertation actually is in native film. It looked at the twofold phenomenon of playing Indian and the idea of native masquerade in film, because, of course, we have the most obvious examples of non-natives playing native roles, and how literally there was a time in Hollywood history where, you weren't an A-list actor until you had played a native person. It really does become kind of a who's who. And you think about everybody, Elvis, Burt Lancaster, Rock Hudson, just Sal Mineo.
Probably Kirk Douglas, too.
I was going to say Kirk Douglas.
Yeah.
The list goes on and on and on. So really, there's this weird sense of, reification that film provides, right? Because seeing is, believing. Right. Exactly. And it raises all sorts of questions of course, native identity and American identity, and obviously issues of appropriation. But at the same time, from the earliest days of film, particularly in a place like Oklahoma, where the 101, those ranch guys end up going straight to Hollywood and working with D.W. Griffith and some of the early pioneers, we've always had native actors. And yet some of the native roles that they were asked to play. Yeah,
they're all supportive, and they weren't the heroes.
Exactly. Well, and they were these fanciful creations. There was actually D.W. Griffith would take dialogue and play it backwards so that it sounded like a native language, supposedly. But even someone like John Ford, of course, and all of his grievances, you have these guys in fancy dance regalia crawling across the floor of Monument Valley as if they're sneaking up on anybody.
Right, like they're with a headdress
exactly.
on it. They would never wear a headdress
so
if they were in Monument Valley.
That was best illustrated. There was a Taos actor by the name of Juan Concha. He was working on Valley of the Sun, Raoul Walsh's production in 1942. And he's asked to work overtime. And he just looks at the director and says, "No, I'm done playing Indian. I'm going home." And that actually, was one of the introductory quotes to one of my chapters in the dissertation, because for as long as we've had non-native actors playing Indian, we've also had native actors playing in native roles. Yeah. And
Dixon, by the way, hated the movies. He just thought they were just so corny.
Specifically, The Vanishing American in, 1925. I remember he had commented on that.
He commented on a few of them because it just was, there was no reality, and he knew it, and it just irked him to the greatest. He just wouldn't deal with it. So how did you pick that? Because at some point when you go back to your master's, you're going in as an English major, and then all of you go, I'm going to go into native literature. Was that even a degree at that point? Clearly it was.
At the University of Oklahoma, obviously your degree was in English.
Yes.
But you would have your primary field of study. And
what year was that?
This was going to be the mid-90s.
And was that kind of a recent thing that they were doing?
Not really. They had been sort of, like UNM and Arizona, they had sort of been at the forefront. And they ended up hiring my dissertation director, Gary Hobson, in the 80s. He had been he was chair of Native Studies, I believe, at UNM at the time. But even prior to Hobson, Alan Vealey at the University of Oklahoma is believed to have taught the very first Native Lit class, because in the early 70s, he's approached by a group of Native students saying, you're teaching Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Why aren't you teaching Indian Lit? And he said, I don't know. And the next semester he did.
So kind of around the second coming of Wounded Knee.
It sort of fell on the heels of what's referred to as the Native American Literary Renaissance, which is basically comprised of, three great works. You have, obviously, Momaday's Housemaid of Dawn. You've got Vine Deloria's Custer Died for Your Sins. And you have Alfonso Ortiz's The Table World, which, these three works just really sort of revolutionized academia in a way that, I should say, by bringing Native people as the scholars as opposed to simply the subjects
Right. And so
of study.
there was something there, though, that clicked with you when you went over there. Do you know what it was? Do you have that reckoning of, well, I'm going to do this? Was it your history or
felt
just
comfortable? It was what I knew. It
Yeah,
was
okay,
what I
there it
grew up with. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I love the work of John Donne, right? But I am not anywhere close to Elizabethan England or Renaissance England or, you know, long time ago England. I don't even remember when he wrote now, late 1700s. Point being, you know, it was something that not only did I recognize because, you know, I'm reading about people that I've known in my life, but there was someone like Sherman Alexie whose work, you know, brought a contemporary voice because obviously I'm younger than Mama Day and Silko and Harjo and people like that. But, you know, Alexie's just a few years older than I am, and reading On Ranger and Tano, Fist Fight in Heaven, well, again, sort of, you know, this is what I enjoy. This is what I want to do. But it's interesting, Alexie gets into film. A lot of people in literature end up doing adaptations of their work for film.
Did you ever think about doing that? I mean, you do your dissertation on native subjects in
That's
film.
That's what the dissertation was.
Yeah, I know. But did you ever think about, hey, I'm going to go to Hollywood and do something a little different, change it up?
Funny you should ask. I am currently working on a script with my best friend, the Comanche writer Jason Asnab.
Yeah, I met him, I think, through you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we're working on a script together that has been, you know, I would compare it to a birthing process, except that birth only takes, 9 months. And this thing's been years and years in the making. But
that's only step one, my friend.
it's only step one. You know, my brother is involved in the film industry, as are a number of my friends. And I've appeared in a couple of shorts and stuff like that. So it's something that I do for fun. It's not anything that I really ever, you know, see myself making.
What was the takeaway from that dissertation?
Takeaway from that dissertation was what, again, was sort of a new era in terms of academia and specifically Native studies. And that I was a non-Native Native studies scholar. And when I started in the 1990s, that was
acceptable.
Well, I don't want to use that word, but yeah, I mean, it was.
Well, it's changed, right?
It's totally changed, and it's changed for the better. Make no mistake. I actually was on the hiring committee for a gentleman by the name of Craig Womack, who wrote a great book called Red on Red, and it basically argues for Native essentialism, and that, you know, these things we believe. And while, you know, you can argue that there's been some sort of, I don't want to say overreaction, but today we're seeing courses by, say, Cherokee scholars who the entire syllabus is nothing but Cherokee authors. We're seeing masters and dissertations produced by, again, a Native scholar who the entire bibliography is nothing but Native authors. That wasn't possible when I was working.
I'm sure not.
And, you know, I would teach every single Native film course, every single, you know, time I taught Native lit classes.
And this is where you were teaching?
At the University of Oklahoma. And, you know, I would always say, if you're wondering why this big dumb white boy is teaching this class, it's because there aren't enough Native PhDs. Take my job.
Yeah.
Well, a decade later, there were
an
awful lot more Native PhDs to the point where I realized that if I was going to continue in academia, I wasn't necessarily going to have the career that I had originally envisioned. And it would be great to be at, say, the University of Colorado, tenure track,
right,
Native studies.
But you saw that was probably not a viable track because you weren't Native?
In part. And because, again, of the growing number of Native scholars whose
and
voices...
it makes sense. I mean, you know...
So I had always been, you know, involved in the family collection. and began collecting, in my late teens and early 20s. And it was something that, obviously was a passion. And I was able to watch my mom, who wrote, her first appraisal over 30 years ago, turn, love and passion into a profession, to the point where she was getting paid to work with these incredible works of art. And I had, while still teaching, was working with her in terms of the appraisal business.
Kind of helping her.
One of the classes I taught at OU was technical writing, and writing about, technical subjects. And so it was a class that was required for all engineering majors. But I realized the parallels of technical writing and appraisal reports. And here we use figures and graphics and all the same principles applied with headers and fonts and white space.
And you get to talk about native art.
And I get to write about native art as opposed to, a hygrometer or something like that. So more and more, I became involved in her business, and it culminated in I'm in my office at the university writing what I thought was going to be the last chapter of the dissertation.
At OU?
This is at OU.
Yeah.
And I got a call from a headhunter who is also a gallerist. Well, Dr. Joy Rebeld in Oklahoma City. And I was presented with an opportunity to work not only in a new industry, so to speak, but with a collection that, is in a lot of ways the backbone of Oklahoma. And this was the Kirkpatrick family collection. The Kirkpatrick family had been responsible for the Oklahoma City Museum of Art. Eleanor Kirkpatrick, along with Nan Sheets, helped do the WPA in Oklahoma. And specifically, I was also brought in to become the executive director of the Brett Weston Archive. And the parallels continued to pile up, because while I had known of Brett's work, and certainly knew images like Garrapatta Beach or Holland Canal, I was able to work with a collection that any, not just photography scholar, but any photographer in the world would just, their jaws drop.
And what was your job? What were your duties in that?
Well,
because you go from teaching, right? So you're teaching.
I'm teaching, and I'm on an academics calendar, right?
But you see also the writing on the wall.
I see the writing on the wall.
Kid, that's probably this is changing, and so you get this headhunter calls you and says, "Hey, you want to basically curate this."
Basically curate this collection and sort of be the, arts administrator for the Brett Weston Archive.
And how old were you at that time? What was this?
I was early 30s. I was 33.
Yeah, so you had been doing it for 8 years as a teacher or so?
Oh, I taught my first class when I was 23, so about 10 years.
Yeah, okay.
8-10 years.
So this is a big change for you.
Big change. I'm used to teaching the Tuesday, Thursday schedule, and I'm going to work for a gentleman who's owns banks and oil companies, and
right. And
8 a.m. Monday morning, you're at your desk.
Is he your boss?
He's my boss.
Yeah.
He's my boss. He's the collector for all intents and purposes. And so I'm working in developing not only his personal and the family's collection, but
to add to it as well?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Acquiring, and I'd like to think, really sort of bringing a level of professional curatorial, decisions to the collection process. Invariably, I would go to him with recommendations that were declined, and there would be acquisitions made that I wasn't.
And was this native arts or Western arts? Or
this is an awful lot of contemporary art as well. Ellsworth Kelly's, the Oklahoma City community foundation ended up commissioning a work.
Did you
that
get to
we
work
did
with
through,
Ellsworth Kelly?
Not personally. I worked with the gallery representative
Yeah.
at Matthew Marks in
Yes,
New
right.
York.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
But I worked very closely with the auction houses because one of my functions at Brett Weston was not only cataloging and publishing the collection, working with scholars and museum exhibits, but we would slowly deaccession works to major auction houses as well as select galleries.
And did you help with that process in the sense that you go, I don't think this is really the quality or whatever, and we should get rid of it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much a matter of lack of quality of getting rid of it. Sometimes it was just the opposite. Sometimes this is of such quality that we want this to enter the market because it's help building, obviously, the
Increase the
artists.
price of, because you have multiples by that artist?
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And it was a matter of, I took it more as a matter of really trying to not simply preserve, but sort of advance and champion Brett's legacy. The traveling retrospective that I co-curated with Stephen Bennett Phillips, who at that time was at the Phillips Collection in D.C., and last I remember he's with the Federal Reserve's art program. We did Brett Weston Out of the Shadow, because while Brett is certainly one of the giants of 20th century photography, he's Edward Weston's son.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so it was a situation of, was Brett's talent and vision in his eye inherent or his inheritance?
Yeah.
Was this something that he saw so much differently than his father? And his father would be the first to say that Brett has his own eyes, not just mimicking my work. And Edward, in the daybooks writes about how Brett's doing better work at age 13 than I was doing at age 30.
You see any correlation for yourself there? I mean, you got a grandfather who's doing Indian art. Your mother is.
I don't want to make those kind of comparisons because I still have to go back and work with her later this afternoon.
You see yourself coming out. I mean, you have that same thing. You have to. Right? For a long time, it was, you're Cynthia Hale's kid, right?
Oh, and to many people, I still am. Let's not kid ourselves. That's where I will say I'm probably the youngest of the old guys because, there's, we're in Santa Fe right now with all the shows, all these great dealers and all these great, artworks here. And I walk down the rows of these shows, and of course, everybody says, "Hi, Scott. How's your mom?"
It is true.
It's
that is
the first thing that people.
That's funny. I do
ask.
it. I do.
And it's I take that as an incredible sign of respect.
Yeah.
And I'm deferent. She knows this. Everybody knows this. I'm not making any pretense. I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for her, just like she wouldn't be where she was if it weren't for my grandfather. Yeah. And it's in that regard that I do think, of things like heritage and not legacy, but 3 generations of supporting native arts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the job that you did as a curator, is that a common job that I deal with curators occasionally for big collections, but
it's not.
Has it grown at all?
Well, it has and it hasn't. I think that it's become more common than maybe it was certainly a decade or 2 decades ago. But make no mistake, a private curator is somewhat of a vanity position. Now there are collectors who need that. I think of Elton John's photography collection, and that's not anything that he himself, can manage on the side of, making platinum records. And it was the same certainly in the Kirkpatrick's family situation where, this is an incredibly large collection as well as good collection. And you want to have more than one set of eyes.
Yeah, well, and
usually more than one set of hands.
Yeah.
So I would, work on developing Brett's market and at the same time really trying to enhance my collector's profile in the collecting community. And
what does that do for them?
Well, a number of things. I mean, you have experienced this firsthand, I'm sure. If you loan something to a museum and it becomes published in a catalog, and because, let's say, it's a traveling retrospective or something to that effect, that artists' market may experience something of a little bit of a bump.
So it's the economy of
economy.
the art world.
Yeah, and again, working specifically for a banker, I mean, we didn't make a lot of bad business decisions.
Sure. He's savvy of this. Clearly.
Exactly.
But is it also a process of trying to build up him or this collection as important so you can get more art that would come to it? Because part of the problem in an art collection, any art collection, is getting the material, right?
Exactly.
And the great stuff, is there's not much of it, and how do you get it? Is that part of this process?
It's part of it, certainly. I can remember working with a Canadian institution that before they would be willing to accept a donation from us wanted to see an inventory of the collection. And I can appreciate why they would want that. At the same time, I think they were kind of data mining and like, what else could we possibly get?
Right.
What else do you have? And we'd
sure
really
they were.
rather have this than that.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the same as is true with dealers. I can remember working with some of the galleries in Chelsea where it was, we're not just going to sell this to anybody, and we want to make sure that it's going.
Yeah, and it's not just going to be sold immediately.
I was working with Sean Kelly Gallery at the time and an Anthony Gormley sculpture, and literally it was like, what other three-dimensional works are in this collection? Because we're not just going to sell you this and it be sort of the standalone great sculpture and surrounded by not so great sculpture.
And did they sell it to you? Apparently not. Apparently not.
I honestly don't remember, but I gotta admit that if they had, I probably might remember. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think about it.
Yeah. Well, that
was, good 15 years ago too.
So how long do you do this curatorial position, and why do
I'm
you switch?
there
Because there's an inflection point here.
Oh yeah. And like I said, I mentioned that it's a vanity position. And
did you recognize it as being that when you're doing it?
I knew that I was not going to be in that position forever.
Uh-huh.
That, as tempting as that might have been.
Yeah, because there's some really great things, right?
Oh, there's some great... I'm in Oklahoma City, but I'm in New York, 6 times a year for sales and openings at institutions.
And dealers recognize who you are and what you are, and they're going to say, come in, please, can I get you something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm working with all of the auction houses. And it was a situation where really in terms of the Brett's estate, we had done so much of, these were sort of the objectives that I was presented with when I had been hired. And we had pretty much checked off every single one of those boxes. And I don't want to say that, relationships sour or get stale, but obviously they change and they evolve over time. And the collector is dealing not as much with the historic photography and the early 20th century modernism, but much more contemporary works. And because of a home in New York City, they're spending more and more time there and working with a number of other people, and it just made less and less sense.
Right. There's other people who want to...
curator in Oklahoma and a good chunk of the collection and all the institutions in New York. And so we had a very long and frank conversation, and I didn't necessarily have as much interest in moving to New York, and I don't think the collector had as much interest in me moving to New York.
Yeah.
And we had just opened the traveling retrospective, which really was kind of, I'd like to think in a lot of ways sort of the calling card, because this
was the Brett Weston?
This was the Brett Weston Out of the Shadow. It opened at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and then traveled to the Phillips Collection in D.C., the Santa Barbara Museum of Art in California, and then back to the Currier Museum in Manchester, New Hampshire. And to get 4 venues for what at the time was really one of the most successful touring exhibits that Oklahoma City had ever mounted, and at the time was their best-selling catalog in the history of the museum's press. It was if you're going to go out on top.
Yeah. Did you write that catalog?
I have an essay in that catalog, yeah. A scholar by the name of Joanna Halford has the other that she co-authored with Stephen Bennett Phillips. And it's amazing because I can remember when it was $25 in most museum gift shops, and today you can find it occasionally on eBay or ABE or Amazon, and it's going sometimes well in excess of $100 or $200.
Hopefully you had a few copies put aside.
I've got a couple. Did I give you one?
I don't think so.
I guess.
Sounds like you
Now I got it.
So you have this inflection point. You kind of part
Have
ways.
this inflection point.
You're still, what, 35 or so? You're pretty
I
young.
am 36 at that point.
Yeah, so you worked for him for 4 years, pretty much.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so what are you going to do? What
And
do you do?
I have a, long sit down with Madre, and we both realized that, when I left Oklahoma, there were pretty much the two of us in terms of art appraisers in the state. And we had enough of a client base in Santa Fe that I sat down with her and I was like, one of us really ought to
Moved to Santa Fe?
move to Santa Fe, set up, put out our shingle there so that we can better serve our clients' needs there and hopefully also, create some new business.
Plus you get to live in Santa Fe.
Plus you get to live in Santa Fe.
I noticed your mom didn't go. It was you, huh?
She had the option. And she will tell you, what was I thinking? And not that Tulsa's not great, but it didn't make sense to have her in Tulsa and me in Oklahoma City. It made more sense for one of us to be in Oklahoma, whether that was Tulsa or Oklahoma City, and the other to be in Santa Fe.
Now, you have a PhD, right?
I am ABD.
Okay.
As soon as I got that call from the headhunter, I left academia, and the idea of going back and finishing that last chapter of my dissertation is unrealistic because so much has changed. I mean, native cinema today is epics, just millennia beyond where it had been.
But did you consider at that point when you left him that maybe I should go look for a museum position or something?
Oh, I
like that?
looked at a couple of museum positions. I was a finalist at the Fred Jones, and I also had a very long, good conversation with the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And the irony being that, friends ended up in both of those positions.
Yeah.
Mark White, of course, who's now the director at Fred Jones in Norman, and God rest her soul, Anne Moran, who, when I interviewed at Cowboy, Steve Graff had just left for the Mary Hill, and Ed Munoz was retiring. So they were kind of, what are we going to do for curators? And I said, look, if you want to bring in a just tag team, and she was up at C.M. Russell, but as the director. And, this is one of Mom's best friends, and I know her well, and she had said, I miss Oklahoma. Yeah. And I really don't like being a director. I like being a curator. So I had said, bring her in for Western, hire me for native. Well, they brought her in for Western. and years later, finally, I mean, Mike Leslie, that collection had been in very capable hands for a number of years, but Mike Leslie, obviously had a background in native art, and so he continued to sort of be the sort of de facto native art curator. But it today is Eric Singleton, Dr. Eric Singleton, I should say, former student of mine at the University of Oklahoma, who his dad had been at Philbrook for years and years, and Eric worked with my mom at Gilcrease when he was in college and grad school. So
political things that go on this too.
No, I don't know about political. I think that in every one of those cases, they ended up with the right hire.
Yeah, that's good. So, but for you, it didn't pan out, or it didn't seem like that was worth the effort.
Thank goodness.
Right.
Well, I won't say it wasn't worth the effort. Just the opposite. I think that I ended up falling into and I shouldn't say falling into. I think, I was on this track.
Yeah,
all
no,
along.
clearly you
It was
are.
just very circuitous.
Right.
But, teaching technical writing, being in native studies at a university, coming from a native collecting
you had all
family,
the building blocks clearly.
it just all
So
sort
when
of
did you
made
guys?
sense.
When did you move to Santa Fe and say, okay, this is it? I'm going to be an appraiser.
2008,
Yeah, so 11 years ago.
11 years ago.
Seems longer. I don't know why. Is that when you really kicked in? Was 2008?
Well, that's when I went to work for Mom full time.
Yeah. Okay.
It was in 2008.
Yeah.
And,
Seems like you've been around forever.
well, I can remember, working with you when you had the gallery at the entrance of Canyon Road.
Yeah. That was a long time
But at
ago.
that time, I was in academia.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
I've always been around.
I
it
think
was
that's
just
what
I
it
had
is.
on different hats.
I
at
think
different
that's what it
times.
is because I've seen you forever.
Oh,
I've known you forever.
At
But-
least 25 years,
Yeah.
something like that. So
And so now you've been doing this for 11 years.
been doing this for 11 years.
And what have you seen in that time frame? Because you've seen some really significant changes from 2008 to now as far as price structure and collectors. And what's kind of the trends that are going on? Both in collecting, and you must be seeing lots of collections come out.
We're seeing lots of collections come out, and especially working with Sotheby's and helping them with things like estates and trusts, and of course, the occasional consignment to a tribal sale. What I'm finding, everybody asks about millennials, and they were asking the same questions about Gen X, right? And why don't they collect, and how come they collect differently? And I will say this about millennials: I don't think that they have the same sort of encyclopedic, all-encompassing mentality. I'm a collector of great jewelry, right? Like you are. I want more than one bracelet.
Yeah.
And if that makes me greedy, that's why I'm in therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
The millennials, I don't see that with them. I think as opposed to having 25 really good bracelets, they just as soon have one great bracelet. And I think there's an economy to their thinking in that regard because, great-grandparents had the 5,000 square foot home. The parents had the 4,000 square foot home. If they have 1,000 square feet in their apartment in San Francisco or Chicago,
Well, and that's the other thing. There's an urban movement to big cities where they just don't have space.
They don't have the space. And so they tend to be much more conscious of what they collect. I mean, I readily admit I have probably bought an object or two that was more just I'll go ahead and get it, as opposed to the really deliberate, thoughtful process that I think a lot of the younger collectors.
And do you see a lot of more estates coming out? I mean, I'm sure your business grows and grows anyway, so it's a little hard to, as you grow your business, it's it's going to happen anyway. But do you see more of that?
And I can speak specifically to how not only is that suggestive of a change in the family's collection, but also the change in sort of the collecting climate today, because I have seen something from the grandfather's collection that should have been returned. That the grandparents were, no, that's mine, and I don't want to give that.
So maybe something that has actual like cultural patrimony.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what do you do when you get something like that? When you
sit down and have a very long talk with them
and explain what this is,
and explain what it is and why they need to be very thoughtful in what they do and how they do it.
And is some of this really spiritual kind of things, or this more prehistoric pottery that may have not had any kind of record of how it was collected? Yeah,
all of the above. I've worked on a number of returns to various nations. Sometimes it tends to be very formal and you go through offices, and sometimes it's meeting somebody somewhere and taking something,
just giving it to them
out of their trunk or out of your trunk and putting it in theirs.
Yeah, because they don't want to go through a formal process. They just want to get the object.
Well, I don't even want to say a formal process. I want to say that for religious reasons.
I see. So, but you do work with things like Atata and work with them when they have.
Been a long
things?
time member of Atata and have worked with Atata. Am very encouraging of Atata and its
This is the
return
Antique
program.
Tribal Dealers Association for those.
Actually, remember
Oh,
they
they
changed the name.
Did you change it? I didn't know. But okay,
They
now what is
changed
it?
the name, as opposed to antique, because now that's not a great term in a lot of people's minds. It's now authentic. So it's the Authentic Tribal Art Dealers Association.
Makes sense.
Which was always in the bylaws. Right. I mean, if you couldn't be a member of Atata and still fake stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that the term antique, like I said, it has sort of a connotation anymore that's just, it sits wrong with a lot of people. And so many of the dealers are now working with more and more contemporary native arts that it didn't make an awful lot of sense to say, oh, no, it has to be
percent
old
of what
stuff.
we have are things
Exactly.
that we're getting directly from native artists.
I mean, case in point, Shanto Bouquet, there's nothing, antique about his work.
Well, and I've never called my gallery anything like that anyway,
Exactly.
so I don't even consider it in that. So you have seen more collections coming out.
More collections coming out. And it's interesting because some of these collections don't have a lot of, really high-end material in it. It tends to be. Exactly.
Things they picked up in Boulder Dam.
And then just the opposite, I'll get a call and, this was sitting in the back of the closet for 50 plus 60 years. And, oh, well, that's,
amazing.
Significant and valuable.
Are museums continuing to add native arts to their collection, especially historic stuff?
Yes. Although I would say that more actively they're collecting contemporary native art. And you look at a place like the Denver Art Museum, where John Lukovic has done shows on Fritz Scholder and Jeffrey Gibson and Virgil Ortiz.
Right. 2 out of 3 are alive.
Well, exactly. Scholder sits in that sort of, hybridized kind of space in terms of both, today we look at him as one of the old guys, but, Bruce Springsteen makes this point all the time in his wonderful new San Ildefonso Pottery show at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, where I work with their Friends of Indian Art Council, is a perfect example of that, because you walk around that and a lot of people just see a bunch of old pots. And Bruce points out, 1880s, this is revolutionary.
Yeah.
This is as contemporary and cutting edge as it gets.
Right, and they're selling to the tourists.
And they're selling
these historic,
to
what
the
we consider to
tourists.
be, well, we call them historic pots, but they're really just, they were being made and sold at places like Indian Market in 1919. That's when they opened that.
Yeah.
On the, out on the plaza selling. And these were things that were meant, they were things that were still being used in some aspects, but the same type of things were also being decorated with all sorts of interesting designs. And so that show's up for how long at MIAC,
That show's going to be up. I don't know that it'll be up for a full year, but it's going to be up for a while. I quite honestly am ashamed that I don't remember the dates immediately off the top of my head.
And that's kind of looking at historic pottery from these are artists and what they were doing as well. Kind of
well, and again, it's being native curated. Obviously, Bruce is involved, but someone like Russell Sanchez is one of the curators on it as well.
He's fairly cutting edge, I would say. He can be at times.
He's great artist.
And even Russell, who's San Ildefonso, he has his basis, his earliest pots would look fairly much like something that would have been done in the 50s or 60s, and now it's not.
Exactly.
Sure. It hadn't been for many years, decades actually.
But no, it's, I work and have written for First American Art Magazine, American Meredith's publication, and she will not let you use the words traditional and contemporary. They do not appear in the magazine. And if you use those words in one of your essays or reviews, she
and why
makes
is
you
that?
change them. because what is contemporary is still traditional. And what we had defined as traditional back then was very contemporary. So that they're misnomers.
Yeah, unless I guess you put it with a timeline, maybe.
Exactly. And even then, that's something that Bruce rails against, and I agree. We can look at an 1880s pot against a 1980s pot, and yeah, there's 100 years of difference, but at the same time, look at these parallels and look at the innovation and change, so that.
Well, and I think also there you have individuals, native artists that are Pueblo potters that are going to places like School of American Research and looking at these things for inspiration.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there definitely will be parallels.
Exactly.
I mean, Marie Z. Chino did a great, pot.
Case in point.
In the 70s, it was.
And, in a lot of ways, that was the case. I mean, Fuchs is showing these pots to Nampeo, just like, Hewitt and those guys are showing these pots to Maria. Yeah. So, in fact, who was it? I was talking with somebody recently that said that, Hewitt specifically handed Maria that black shirt because all she would have to do is touch it, and that, this genetic memory would resurface, and she would automatically know how to do this because her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, etc.
Yeah. All right. Anything else that we should discuss?
I would say, buy native art, collect native art. We're experiencing a movement in the industry right now, a shift, and it's an important one that needs to take place because there are things out there that need to come back. And they're so few and far in between. That doesn't mean that they're not a good number out there, but in comparison with everything else, not every single moccasin needs to, or pair of mocks, not every single bracelet, these were made to be traded.
Yeah.
Sometimes with natives, sometimes with non-natives. So that the best way, I think, a collector can do the right thing is to not only work diligently insofar as researching an acquisition, but also to, of course, buy it from a reputable dealer. Yeah. And here I've got to, of course, acknowledge a longtime friendship with Dr. Sublette and the outstanding legacy that he has built in terms of the native arts industry. But for families like my own, who, have things that were collected many years ago by people who are no longer with us, do the research on these pieces. And if it's discovered that for whatever reason it does fall, everybody's alarmed about the STOP Act. The STOP Act is going to be nothing but an extension of NAGPRA. And I will say this unabashedly, sometimes a bad law is better than no law at all. And I'd rather the Hopi be able to get things back from a European auction house because there's a law in the books than them have to be told by a French court, you don't exist.
Yeah. So what we're talking about basically is that there's certain things that, especially with some of the tribes like the Navajo with their Yeviche mask and the Hopi with their masks, these things shouldn't be sold. They never should have been sold. They're objects. They have power. They're gods. And I think anybody in our profession recognizes that and would be the first ones to say, you shouldn't have this.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Maybe you should find the right avenue to get these back. And that's not something we ever really handle. And when those rare occasions, at least in my own experience, come that we see something and go, I don't think this is, this seems more religious,
right.
Whether it's a medicine pouch or something, I just refer them to either Atada or, quite frankly, back to the tribe, if I figure out what tribe it is and see what they have to say about it.
And it even sometimes becomes, who do you refer it to at the tribe? Because things can get lost in the shovel. I mean,
they don't.
Tribes are offices like any office, and if you don't end up with the right person on the right telephone call, you can sort of get, again, lost in the shuffle.
And again, the antique tribal Or
is
as
a
we
great
now we
vehicle
call
by
it,
which to
the,
do it.
Authentic tribal.
I'm actually working with a couple of Native attorneys right now, hopefully trying to create a 501c3. And Atata is in a position to do something very similar to this, given that they already have this sort of infrastructure in place. But, the tax laws are such that a nonprofit can turn around and give something to someone under related use. The same is true if we're going to get things back. I think that you get more with honey than vinegar, and that if we can incentivize the return. Now, that doesn't mean it's for sale, but if someone can get, say, a tax deduction to make sure that it's going back to the nation, that way we might get some of those older mentalities where, no, it's mine, I bought it. Because like I said, the millennials today, most of the grandchildren that I'm working with, what do you mean it's problematic? Of course, give it back. I can't believe Grandpa had something
I think
like
some
that.
of this will just wash out with the generation, quite frankly.
It really will.
Yeah.
I'll say that about millennials. Not only are they savvy collectors, they by and large want to do the right thing.
Well, I think all of us do. At least I hope they do.
Most of us.
I mean, the thing is, everybody that I know in this business has friends that are native, deal in native material that is contemporary. Why wouldn't we?
Exactly.
Really.
And look at, we're getting ready to have the largest art event in terms of native arts, the largest art event in terms of the state of New Mexico with Indian Market.
Yeah.
And so go out, buy native art.
Yeah.
The laws that, are applicable to an overwhelming minority of the objects out there aren't applicable to anything you're going to buy at Indian Market.
No.
So go spend money, support native arts.
Yeah. Historic and contemporary both.
Start building that collection because at some point you're going to need to have it appraised.
Yeah, and that's where Scott Hale comes in Santa Fe. All right, very good. Well, I'll let you go schmooze. I'm going to actually go back and
you've got to go to your booth and make some money, sell some art.
Yeah, or if nothing else, talk to all of my friends and clients and things that come in, and those who haven't done this.
Santa Fe misses you, man.
Well, I haven't gone. I just don't have.
I know, but
I make them go to Tucson now.
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
They can see me in August for about 2 weeks.
I love Tucson. The only thing I don't know how you guys do is that heat.
What heat?
What heat? Yeah. That's how you do it.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Very good.
Good to see you, man. Thanks again.
Say hi to your mother. How's she doing, by the way?
She's doing just fine. She's getting ready to ramp up for all the openings tonight, and of course the Atata meeting.
All these fun things. These will all be over by the time we play this, but you can next August put it on your schedule. It's kind of that first 3 weeks in August, and there's something going on all the time.
August in Santa Fe is a special time and a special place.
I would say it should be a bucket list. Everyone should always go.
It really should. And for the arts collectors out there that don't necessarily focus on native or Western or Spanish colonial, if you're going to Basel or if you're going to Maastricht or if you're going to the Armory, you're missing something if you're not coming to Santa Fe.
Native artists that come into around the world. They're all there. Boom. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Very good.
Good to see you, man. Hale. Thanks again. Take care. Good.
We didn't even get interrupted.
No interruptions?
Nope. And how long do you think that was, Scott?
45. Was it?
We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.